this is Don Stanley, and I am with Erin Podolak. Erin was a student in LSE 432 last year and has a really cool story to share with you guys. So, Erin, I'm going to just ask you to introduce yourself, tell us what you're doing right now, and then we'll talk about class and how you might be able to help the students with some of the things they're doing in class.
Great. Well, I am Erin, like Don said, and I work for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. It's a federally designated comprehensive cancer center here in New England, specifically Boston. I have been working here since the very end of July as a science writer for development, and so that is kind of a mixture of things because it pulls on my background in journalism and in science, but it also has to do with stewardship of donors who give gifts to Dana-Farber and kind of thank them for supporting research here. So it kind of is a mixture of two worlds. And then I do a lot of blogging and social media on the side, and it's kind of fueling a bunch of other side projects and participation in conferences and a lot of other things that kind of build my career but aren't necessarily in my job description.
Ah, okay. So it sounds like you got a really nice mix of almost like feature type writing / marketing type writing along with the science writing and then what you're doing on the side. So you have done some pretty incredible things in the last year, and one of the things that the students in class this semester will be a number of them are going to be starting out with really using social media to develop their personal brand and blogging. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, and then one of the things I would love is to get your advice for them, being somebody who was in the class just a year ago. Granted, you had a head start and were doing some things ahead of time, but still, I think you've got some great tips and advice that you might be able to share. So why don't you tell us your story first, and then share some of those tips and advice.
Absolutely. So I started my blog. It's called Science Decoded, and I started it when I first moved to Wisconsin for grad school. So that was in August of 2010. And I knew that I had wanted a blog for a while, but I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to make of it. But I decided that kind of going to grad school experience was a good impetus for starting it. And so I started out just pulling things from the media and talking about them. So seeing an article written about a scientific discovery or something and just kind of giving my commentary on it. That was not particularly effective because, as you can imagine, most of my blog hits were coming from my mom and friends in New Jersey or people that knew me personally, but not really other science writers, not really people who had the same interests that I do. It was more people that were interested in me. And, I really appreciated their support, but it wasn't exactly what I was going for. And so I started tailoring my blog slowly over time and doing different kinds of posts and pulling more in terms of the things that were really interesting me. And so I did do some posts about the experience of grad school. I started sharing some of my projects, things that I was working on for journalism school, different interviews that I did. I started interacting with more scientists, and instead of featuring just my commentary, featuring other people, doing more interviews, making sure to get other voices on the blog and talking to people about things as posts. And I started doing a lot more media analysis because that's really where my strength was. I'm a journalist. So I have this specialty in science communication, and so that's what the blog became. Instead of a science blog, it became a science communication blog. And that was just a switch that happened over time by following my interests. So when I got to LSE 432, I was in my last semester of my master's program. So I had been blogging for 2 years, but still, I was maybe bringing in about 2,000 hits a month. It wasn't, there wasn't any engagement. I wasn't really doing a lot. I had started Twitter a couple months before and had a handful of followers, but nothing major. And so I started to try to figure out who I needed to be talking to kind of get this higher profile on my blog. And that's where some of the assignments, like the stakeholder stock and things like that, came into play. And I hit on the blogs editor at Scientific American as someone who was extremely helpful for new and young science writers. And they had recently, within the last few months at the time, launched a blog network for science writers. And one of their blogs focuses on new and young science writers. And so it was really a perfect platform for starting to showcase my work. And they had an interest in the UW-Madison program.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of a foot in the door. And when I started interacting with him on Twitter, that sort of grew. And then I had my blog and to back me up. And I had all these things that I'd already been doing. And so it sort of became a relationship that was really mutually beneficial. He has helped me tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also been able to write some posts and work with him on other things. So it's kind of worked out that way, but it definitely grew over time and it changed as I figured out what I wanted to do.
And that's one of the questions that I know a lot of the students who haven't done anything yet, I think it's very common to say, you know, what's my voice and what is it that I'm going to write about? So you, with the 2 years of experience, if you could go back to Erin 2 years ago, just starting, knowing what you know now, what would be some tips you'd give her that maybe some of the students who are trying to discover what to even communicate about might be able to use to help them?
I would say first and foremost to not worry so much. I think that sometimes when you are from our generation and you know you're putting something out there on the internet, you can kind of feel this sense of, I hope this doesn't come back to bite me, and what if someone starts trolling me, or what if it's not right, or what if I change my mind later. Just put it out there and see what happens with it. And that's not to say don't be thoughtful about it, don't edit it. Think about what you're putting out there, but also just don't be a perfectionist to such a level that it paralyzes you. Put out posts, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get any interaction at all, is you have to have the content. And if you're not making the content and you're not putting it out there, nobody's going to care. You have to have something to offer people. So I think my first bit of advice would be to just bite the bullet and do it. Put out a bunch of posts, even if they're not exactly perfect. You will figure out along the way what you want to do. And it can be really interesting to be able to see the way a blog and your interests change over time. So my first bit of advice is definitely to just do it.
Yeah.
I think the second thing that I would say is that you need to do what interests you. So don't worry too much about what everyone else is blogging about. They've got it covered. If everyone else is talking about it, you don't need to talk about it too. Because for the most part, you know, there's other voices out there that people already know that they're going to listen to. So you need to find out what makes you different. So chase your own interests and write about what you're passionate about, not what you think everyone wants to hear. People will take an interest in you if you are really interesting, and the way to do that is to do what interests you. So worry a little bit less about what everyone else is doing and more about what you're doing. And other advice, I think when I was just starting out, you know, you really kind of want to know why, well, I'm putting all this out there, but what's coming of it? And I think that unless you start helping each other, you're not going to see any growth. When my blog started to take off was when I started for class commenting on all my classmates' blogs. And it seems like a really small step, but it was a really important step, because not only did it get me more comfortable commenting on other blogs, it got more attention on my blog, and so there was just more going on. And so when other people would check it out, they would see that there were conversations happening. So I would encourage you not only to just focus on these kind of high-level people that you want to emulate or that you admire, but also focus on your peers. Spread the love. Show some love to your classmates' blogs, even if the topics aren't necessarily what you're blogging about. It's kind of this, Robert Krulwich, who is a journalist, he gave a commencement address that is really great, and he brought up this idea of horizontal loyalty, and it's kind of this idea that you need to build new things, and the way to do that is to do it with your peers. So it's kind of loyalty on this level. And so I think that really the advice I could give you is to seek out your peers that also have similar interests, start tweeting at them as well, seeing what you can come up with, sharing ideas, and kind of building a community that way. Build a community of your peers, not just people that are at a much higher level and more established in their career. And kind of help each other with your peers and build it up from there, because honestly, other people that are just like you, that also want a following, that also want to talk about these things, are far easier to get to help you and to comment, to talk to, and interact with than it is to get someone who's way established in their career.
So. I love that advice. That's fantastic advice, because there's two things I think that happen in there. One is that form of social proof, that somebody comes to your blog and sees that there is conversation going on. But the second thing is, a lot of people forget, like at one time in the science writing field, Boris was a new guy. And that looking for peers, you guys it's kind of like that rising tide lifts all ships. I think that's great advice, that, looking at obviously targeting some of the big names to do some interacting with, etc., is important. But like you said, that horizontal loyalty, that connection with folks, I think is really, really incredibly important. So excellent pieces of advice. And as far as Twitter, what were some of the things that you did with Twitter? I know you said you started the Twitter account a couple months before class started, but how did your Twitter activity and actions change, and benefits potentially from Twitter once you started dug into Mark's book and started applying Twitter in a strategic way?
Well, I think the change was just that. It was being more strategic about it. I had always been retweeting things that I found interesting or articles that I was reading, but I wasn't really retweeting people. And I think that was a major change after having read Mark's book, because I had been retweeting a link from NPR or the New York Times or Wired, or things that I was reading that were interesting, but why wasn't I retweeting the author of that post, the person who wrote it? And so I think that was one of the major things I did to start interacting with people. It's important to interact with the brand as well. I still follow all those accounts and do retweet them occasionally, but I do much more retweeting of people, and always including a handle of who authored that post, because it lets them know that, I read this. And I have had people who I had no idea who they are, but I just read their article and they tweet me back and say, thanks for reading, thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. And I do the same thing when people retweet my blog posts. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. And so I think that was one of the major ways that I started interacting more with people. And then being more targeted about who those people were, seeking out writers and other bloggers. There's a couple really great science blogging networks. Scientific American has a huge one. Wired has one. The Public Library of Science has one. National Geographic has one that they just launched recently. And so finding all of those bloggers and making sure that I was following them on Twitter so that I could retweet their articles, and also consequently you retweet someone enough times, so finally going to say, who the hell is this person? And why won't they leave me alone, and why are they reading everything I'm putting out?
Creepy stalking, right?
Creepy stalking, but so they will eventually check you out. And so I think that's one way to get some more attention from people that are kind of a higher level, more established. And the other thing that you can do that I did, and it worked out really well, is to just tell people that you're talking about them. I did that with Carl Zimmer, who is a great science writer. I did a review of his latest book, Science Inc., and I tweeted him that I did it, and it got a retweet, and you're kind of, I think when you're just starting out with Twitter and social media, you get that first retweet from a really big name, and you kind of are freaking out, because even though he just had to push a button, it still means a lot to you.
Absolutely.
And so that's the other thing, is I think making sure that people know if you've said something about their work, if you've mentioned them, link to them, tell them.
And on that,
always going to want to know if you're talking about them.
And on that note, the Forbes top 50 list of media influencers just came out a couple days ago, and Scott Stratton, the author of Unmarketing, is number 4 on that list. And tell us about your interaction with Scott, who isn't a science writer, comes from a very different background, has a very different style. So
well, I started interacting with Scott because I reviewed his book Unmarketing, and I wrote a blog post about it that I think caught his attention because it was different from something he had ever seen before. It wasn't a review of the book, it was how the book applied to science writers and journalists, and why people in my field should be reading his book and paying attention to it. And so I wrote a blog post about it that was very much in my style. It's very conversational, just kind of me tossing out my opinions. And then I tweeted Stratton and told him that I had done that, and he not only replied to me on Twitter, but he went to my blog, read the post, and left a comment. which was really great. And it was really a fun thing for me to do and to see on my blog, and to get that comment was really great.
Yeah, and again, I know he's the kind of person who I think is going to continue to follow and monitor, and that's the kind of outreach and interactions I think you did in a strategic way that make a lot of sense. So one of the things I just want to revisit for a second is a question that a lot of people are going to have is, how do I find the people in my industry? So what did you do, Erin, to again connect? I mean, you mentioned it already, but I just want to hit on that again, because I think that's one of the key points, is finding who to connect with, and starting to cast your net of building that network in a strategic way.
Well, there are definitely a couple ways you can go about it. I was a real newbie to Twitter, so when I did it in a way that was not particularly strategic, I just kind of added in a lot of people really quickly, a lot of people that came up when I searched for people using science hashtags or things like that, writing hashtags. But there's a lot of other ways that you can go about it. And now when I'm looking to add new people and new voices, check out conferences that are in your field,
yes.
and look for the hashtag for that conference. See who's tweeting on that hashtag, who was participating in those conversations for a conference. I'm going to a conference called Science Online, and that's a huge science writing, science blogging conference. And so following all the people that are going to that conference and active on that hashtag is a great way to add people that are already really interested in being active on Twitter. You can also, like I mentioned, find other writers, bloggers, people that are doing things that you like to do, and make sure you add them, because they will most likely have their Twitter and their contact information on their blog. So make sure you're following all the writers that you already do and that you're already interested in. Find blog networks, follow all of those bloggers. And also just seeing who other people are talking to. You can check out Twitter lists if there are different lists. If someone has a writer's list or a blogger's list, and they're a major name, follow the people on their list. Check that out. See who other people are following. Boris Kovic, who I mentioned, is the blogs editor at Scientific American. Just following the people that follow him, the people that he follows, and so checking out who major players are also listening to is another way to go about it.
It just takes a little bit of time, but obviously it's paid big dividends. So why don't you tell us kind of some of the results of what you're going to be doing this summer, and some of where things are going for you with what you've done, not only in the work you're doing now, but the personal stuff you're doing.
Well, as I mentioned with my job, social media is not a part of my daily job description, but it is something that I do, have the freedom and the flexibility to do regularly, and it is something that helped me get my job. Even though this isn't a social media job, I had Twitter, and I had my blog, and I had lists of articles and my website, and those things were pulled and used when I was interviewed, and I didn't supply them. So I was absolutely searched for online, and I was absolutely checked out, and I had all those things to back me up. So that was definitely, it played a big role in getting the job, and it was something that I brought up and talked about a lot. And so even though it wasn't necessarily part of the job description, it showed a real presence in journalism and in science writing, which is something that my employers are definitely interested in supporting me in doing. So I think that that's kind of an important aspect of it. So even if your job isn't necessarily social media guru, there's a way to work it into a lot of different jobs, and to keep that interest alive. But some of the great things that have come out of it, my blog has really taken off lately. I'm getting a lot of hits. I mentioned kind of when I was starting. LSC 432, monthly hits for me was around 2,000. It's up around 10,000.
Wow.
So it has grown tremendously.
That's fantastic.
I was able to guest post on the Scientific American blog. I interviewed their blog's editor and very skeptically asked him, why on earth are you helping me? What is the deal with this blog you have for new science writers? Because I don't, why? I'm not great. I don't get it. Help. Like, what are you doing? And that became a guest post on their blog, so I got to see my byline in Scientific American, which was really
cool.
a great moment for me. And that relationship has grown, and now I've been invited to speak at the World Conference of Science Journalists in Helsinki, Finland. as
So
part of a
jealous.
panel that is being organized by Bora, the blog's editor at SciAm, and he invited me to be a panelist to talk about the killer science journalists of the future and using social media and digital new media platforms to do our work as science writers and kind of what this web kids generation is doing as we're moving into the professional sphere and how that's shaping science journalism. So it's a really exciting opportunity. That'll be June, and I get to go to Finland, which is pretty great.
Cool.
And so it really did, building a relationship that started with Twitter and my blog is launching me onto more of a national platform, international platform. For science writing and for the things I want to do. And so it definitely, not only did it help me land a full-time job after graduating, which is a huge deal, it also is kind of helping me build this other professional profile and this other professional life as well. So,
which is so cool. Yeah, I mean, it's just to see the trajectory of things that are going on from the. Again, I was telling the students yesterday in class. Yesterday was the first day that it was 12 months ago that you came and sat in the class, and seeing what you accomplished, not in 12 months, but in 6 months, really, of actually, you had a foundation, but then you really ran with it and have done just an amazing things. And we actually got to have a guest post too on Mark Schaefer's blog, which is one of the top 50 business blogs in the world, which was kind of cool as well. So
that's great. Yeah.
Well, I am really excited to have you joining class February 5th. You'll be back from a conference in North Carolina or South Carolina?
Yes.
North Carolina, so you'll have some fresh stuff to share with us. The students are going to watch this ahead of time, so we may be tweeting out some questions to you, those types of things. So can you tell us, I'll add it in the notes as well, but can you tell us the name of your blog as well as your Twitter handle so that we can have them start connecting with you?
Absolutely. My blog is called Science Decoded. It's sciencedecoded.blogspot.com. And then you can email me at sciencedecoded@gmail.com, or you can also find me on Twitter. It's at Erin Podolak, ErinPodolak. And I would love to, answer any questions ahead of time, or be able to prepare better answers for you, or come up with links or things to show you. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to help because, like Don said, I was in your shoes, just a year ago, and it has been an incredible year. Kind of crazy to even think about how far I've come and having lived in 3 states in 2012 and coming full circle to a full-time job and really doing well with all these conferences and opportunities. So if I can help you guys in any way, let me know.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and we will plan on seeing you February 5th. Have a great time down in North Carolina, and thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right.